Hey guys, Spirit of the Lie here. In this video, we're going to do a relatively brief crash course in AoE1 for those of you trying it out with the new DLC. This will hopefully speed up the learning curve of the early game priorities, tech tree, and the hidden unit bonuses especially, which can take a lot of trial and error to figure out the hard way. Now, I'm not the best AoE1 player by a long shot, but if you're struggling against the extreme AI or nervous about playing online with the new DLC, I'm very confident after this video and a couple of practice games, you'll be beating the extreme AI in no time. We're going to start off with some economic basics, highlighting some important distinctions from Age of Empires 2. First of all, a very important thing to note that contrasts with AoE2 is that all of the major food sources collect at basically the same rate. Over a couple of minute long test, I found basically all food sources are 26 or 27 food per minute for each villager, aside from shorefish, which is the one exception and fastest gathering. This is very different than AoE2, where food from deer is collected over 30% faster than berries, and even more so for Mongols, as one example. Villagers in AoE1 also carry 10 of every resource instead of having their carry capacity increase for hunt, making that again even less efficient. Something else to note is the various decay rates. Elephants actually decay a bit slower than gazelles, at 12 instead of 15 food loss per minute, but interestingly crocodiles and wolves decay at double that rate. So despite having 100 food in them, with one villager collecting, you don't even get half of that much. While this has admittedly started a little bit on the technical side, the main takeaway is that berries are the best food source to start with, and taking into account villagers' cost and creation time, you need 6 on berries to sustain that long term, which is best to do as soon as possible, after building 1 or 2 houses. Personally, I like to have a scouting villager as well early, and then put the next few villagers on straggler trees. Of course, in AoE1, you don't start with a scout, and that scout villager can also do things like build houses, push deer, or lure elephants. Even though our goal is to get 500 food to advance to the next age, those next villagers on trees are very important, so you can afford houses, and eventually save up the wood for a storage pit on your wood line. If you can find a good spot for a storage pit that covers wood as well as being close to gazelles, that's pretty much ideal. Or even if you can find gold or stone that's also close to wood, so you can get both. If not, you can always build a separate storage pit near gazelles or push them with a villager if you have some patience. At the end of the day though, as long as you're keeping your villagers coming out from the town center and putting them on a mix of wood and food, you're going to get to tool age at a decent time. Very likely competitive with the extreme AI if you aren't idling the town center, and even doing just that will put you ahead of a lot of people online. In fact, even just knowing which buildings go on what resources is already a competitive advantage in a surprising number of games, as the DLC is a lot of people's first experience with AoE1. But speaking of which, we should cover that topic. Back in that earlier test, notice I had a mix of storage pits and granaries, and this is one of the more confusing parts of picking up the game at first. These are not interchangeable, and granaries are the drop-off point for berries and farms, whereas storage pits drop off everything else. The easy way to remember it is that granaries are for vegetarians and storage pits are for carnivores. One little trick to know though is if your villager is carrying any type of food, you can assign it to a different source of food to change its drop-off point, and the game forgets what you were previously carrying. For example, a hunter carrying food can be assigned to a farm and then use a granary, and notice food isn't lost when switching between food types. But while we're on the topic, the granary and storage pit have a couple of other interesting roles. The granary gives defensive building upgrades, of all things, having the text to enable walls and towers, as well as their upgrades. The storage pit, on the other hand, has unit upgrades, with melee attack and melee armor upgrades for infantry, archers, and cavalry. The exception is the shield text, giving infantry pierce armor, but basically aside from a couple of civ bonuses, the only way to upgrade archer or cavalry pierce armor is to switch to an archer with more base pierce armor, like the horse archer, or upgrade farther down the cavalry line at the stable. So that's the admittedly confusing granary and storage pit, and another critical economic building we should talk about is the market. This is a crucial building to get in the early tool age for a few reasons. First, it unlocks farms, which usually you'll need at some point in the tool age as you'll run out of berries, gazelles, and elephants nearby. A couple of important texts to highlight at the market are first the wheel, which increases villager walking speed by a whopping 50% and also unlocks chariots. Other high priority techs are the wood upgrades, which in addition to boosting your wood collection, are the only way to increase your archer's range. This is also where you find the farm upgrades, with each one scaling to make your farms last about 30% longer than before. Stone mining and gold mining techs can also be important if you have a lot of villagers on those resources, and note the stone mining tech also gives your slingers an extra attack and range. I should also point out that market rebalancing and trade are also in the game now, though the rebalancing is done at far worse buy and sell prices compared to AoE2, so I wouldn't rely on the market unless you absolutely have to. Moving on, another hugely important building is the Government Center, which you get in the Bronze Age. You can tell this is a video game and not real life because a lot actually happens at this building. First off, government centers are important if for no other reason than you need it to create more town centers, so in a booming situation, you'll want to get this building right away. Keep in mind, town centers are only 200 wood in AoE1 and cost no stone, compared to a storage pit or Granary's 120, while of course being able to create and hide villagers, so town centers end up being a great deal. The most notable techs at the government center I'd say are nobility, giving your mounted units HP like bloodlines in AoE2, ballistics, which is the same as ballistics in AoE2, and alchemy, which gives your ranged units +1 attack. Given how hard it is to upgrade attack, that's a pretty good one for archers. In the Return of Rome DLC, there's also a few new techs added, including City Watch as basically the game's version of AoE2's Town Watch, and Conscription with similar names and effects. There's also the brand new urbanization tech, which doubles the capacity of houses. And keep in mind, houses in AoE1 hold 4 instead of 5 villagers. One final note about buildings is be careful if you're coming from AoE2 that buildings here have much lower HP than you're used to. Things like houses die fast, even to archers, and in fact, housing an opponent can be a great move to mess with their army and villager production. So that's the buildings and techs, and now let's talk about your military options, including the basic counters and hidden bonus damage. Right away, something you'll notice in the AoE1 tech tree is that all of the early units dead end immediately, where massing axemen, slingers, bowmen, or scouts in Tool Age don't directly lead into Bronze Age unit upgrades, discouraging a lot of early military investment. That said, if your challenge right now is beating the AI, and that's your immediate goal, I think making some Tool Age units is probably the best way to go, rather than trying to rush to the Bronze Age. The AI tends to make early units itself, and I think you're better off being aggressive and making it chase your army than get stuck on the back foot, as it's quite hard to defend in AoE1 given your lack of town center arrows. But now let's actually go through the different units for each building and see what they're good at. Starting at the barracks, notice you have 3 different unit lines. The first is the Clubmen, which are a slightly slower and tankier version of a villager, but upgrade to Axemen in Tool Age, which are maybe surprisingly your anti-cavalry infantry, with 5 base attack but another +4 against cavalry. Don't underestimate how surprisingly easy it is to die to an Axeman rush in the first 12 minutes of the game, especially if your plan was to go scouts or slingers, neither of which do particularly well, and instead the only real counter is bowmen due to some bonus damage. That leads us to our second barracks option, which is the Slinger, as your anti-archer and almost early siege unit. They have just 2 base attack, but gain +2 more against archers and +3 against towers and walls, while also starting with 2 pierce armor, making slingers a reasonable choice against almost anything firing arrows early. Keep in mind they cost 10 stone each, which is very unusual for Age of Empires, and are upgraded by stone mining techs for more attack and range. The final unit line at the barracks is the Swordsman line, which have some pretty good bonuses for Romans and Chosen. This is your standard cheap mass infantry, and in fact, with the government center tech logistics, take up just half a population slot each. Don't sell them too short though, as they're also incredibly upgradable, with not only attack and melee armor, but their pierce armor can also be improved, making them in the end fairly well rounded. One major thing to know that the game doesn't tell you but is really important is they take massive bonus damage from the cavalry line. So while the barracks starts as anti-cavalry in Tool Age with the Axemen, in the late game that dynamic mostly flips, at least in terms of population efficiency. Of course, that means the Swordsman line is technically weak to archers and also cavalry to some extent, and for that reason only a couple of civilizations regularly make them. Moving along to the archery range now, this is where I'd say you get the largest variety of units and some really tough decisions. You start off in the Tool Age with the Bowmen, which, as of Return of Rome, have +2 damage against Axemen, so they're your obvious early game response to infantry, but also make for a good raiding unit in their own right. In return though, they're countered by Scouts and Slingers, who both do bonus damage against them. Remember not to mass too many though, as you can't upgrade them later, and instead in the next stage you have a brand new separate foot archer line, this time costing gold but having better range and attack. Interestingly, they don't have any bonus damage this time, but are just strictly better stats wise, and it is worth making the switch. Of course, your other Bronze Age choice is the Chariot Archer, which are famously overpowered for a few reasons. They have the same range as a composite bow, more HP, and are almost 70% faster, while only costing food and wood. So this is an AoE2 trash unit. While the composite bowman has more total damage output, Chariot Archers are always a safe default, especially for civs like Assyrians, Egyptians, and Hittites, who have a good bonus for them. Moving into the Iron Age though, you get another two options. Of course, you can either keep making Chariot Archers or composite bowmen, or you could switch to Horse Archers, which are an objectively better but expensive version of Chariot Archers, having more attack and armor, but swapping the wood for gold cost. If you're floating a lot of resources, you can even upgrade them further to Heavy Horse Archer, and once you add in a bunch of government center techs, you can make them quite possibly the strongest unit in the game when massed. The other new option you get is the Elephant Archer, which cost a ton of food and are very tanky, but I think are overall worse than Horse Archers. They're just basically what Carthaginians and Phoenicians are encouraged to use instead. And in fact, I should note for all of this that Lac Viet is the only civilization with all of these units available at the archery range. Next, we're going to move on to Siege, as for some reason the Siege Workshop is unlocked by making an archery range first. Here you have two options, with the major difference being stone throwers are anti-building with 140 hidden bonus damage against most buildings, whereas the ballista is more anti-unit, with double the fire rate but no anti-building bonus damage. So they're better at just outranging enemy units, especially after a government center tech, giving them 2 extra range. But now let's take a look at the cavalry options. The first is of course the Scout, which had a very important improvement in Return of Rome, gaining +3 secret bonus damage against archers, essentially doubling their attack against them. Outside of that, I personally like using Scouts to uncover the map, and a group of 3 or 4 can even fight villagers. In fact, I would say they might be the easiest unit if you want to rush the AI, as Axemen are only a counter if you accept that fight. Now, as we look to the Bronze Age, it turns out you have 3 new options, depending on your civilization. The first and most important is the Cavalry, which, as I mentioned earlier, has a bonus against swordsmen. And while they are quite expensive at 70 food and 80 gold, they can seriously end the game quickly if they get into someone's economy. Alternately, you have what I think of as a discounted alternative in the Chariot, which is unlocked by the technology The Wheel. They only cost food and wood, and give you the same speed as the standard cavalry, but have lower HP, attack, and armor. For me, Egyptians are the main civ coming to mind that makes these, as they don't have cavalry, and get a decent chariot bonus of 33% more HP. The third option is the Camel Rider, who are similar in cost to cavalry, but a bit worse stats-wise, depending on the civilization. They make up for that though with a bonus against all types of cavalry, chariots, and elephants, and against cavalry especially, their +8 is quite strong, letting them win one-on-one. Naturally, they're worse than cavalry against anything else though, and also can't be upgraded in Iron Age to a more elite version. Speaking of which, the Iron Age opens up a few more options, including some upgrades for both chariots and cavalry. The Scythe Chariot in particular is notable for gaining trample damage to nearby units, and the cavalry upgrades are also quite good, giving more armor and HP, making them very tanky by the end. If you're willing to sacrifice some speed for an even tankier option at the stable though, you also have the War Elephant for some civilizations, which have not just a hidden bonus against buildings, but their own trample damage to adjacent units. So infantry and even cavalry can really struggle against them. The elephants are surprisingly quick as well, but conversions are still probably the easiest way to deal with at least a small number of them. But now let's move on to the Academy, which is unlocked by building a stable of all things and gives you a single unit, the Hoplite. If you're familiar with AoE2, this is basically the Teutonic Knight, as a relatively slow infantry with great HP, attack, and armor. Notably, they also don't take the cavalry's anti-infantry damage, while having up to 14 melee armor and 5 pierce armor. Generally, in a competitive setting, it seems speed and range are what win games, and Hoplites are the exact opposite of that, but are generally still an effective anti-infantry and anti-cavalry choice, based purely on raw stats alone. Finishing up with the final land unit, here we have the Priest at the Temple, unlocked by the Market of all things. This one's pretty self-explanatory, and converts enemy units while healing your own, and they have various upgrades to improve them, ending up converting and healing significantly faster than monks in AoE2 once they get all their upgrades. One word of warning though is be careful of the technology Zealotry, which is actually a villager upgrade, dropping their carry capacity to 6 or 8, depending on the resource, and can't be undone. So it ends up being an economy nerf to buff your villager stats, almost like a hybrid of Supremacy and Flemish Revolution. So that's the basics of the economy, buildings, and units covered. And now let's wrap up with a few final tips. The first, and a probably very natural question at this point, is what's a good civilization? The diplomatic answer is they're all fun and balanced, but if you're looking for some suggestions, the Lac Viet are very strong. Their early forage bonus, faster created units, and faster built houses all give you a great economy, while archers are also fun to play. So at the moment, I'd say they're my personal favorite. Another good archer civ is the Minoans, who are a bit slower to get going but have faster farmers and a deadly +2 range on their composite bows. They're super cheap, long range, and have decent damage output, with the potential to be a bit of a deathball unit. If, on the other hand, cavalry is more of your thing, then I'd say the Yamato are pretty fun. Their new team bonus gives them cheaper stables and ranges, which also have cheaper upgrades and cheaper cavalry and horse archers. There's a lot of synergy here, where everything is streamlined toward a great stable combined with horse archers in the late game, which, as I said, I think are eventually the strongest unit in the game. If instead though you're looking for an aggressive try-hard strategy, Assyrians, Egyptians, or Hittites into chariot archers are kind of a classic. Once you hit Bronze Age, just get the wheel, and then just spam chariot archers as much as you can until you have an overwhelming number. While that particular strategy might sound a bit mind-numbing, AoE1 has some pretty creative civs, with Palmyrans for example having villagers that cost 50% more but work 25% faster for the whole game. Really, every civ has a specialty, and civ choice in the Age of Empires franchise never completely dominates the outcome of a game. Just stick with good principles, like constantly making villagers, staying focused on the resources you need, so not getting sidetracked with gold and stone in the first age, use hotkeys and control groups to speed up repetitive things, make lots of production buildings if you're floating resources, and generally just experiment with units, while paying attention to what seems to counter what. These are great principles in any age game, and apply just as much to AoE1. So those are my thoughts on what you need to hit the ground running in the new DLC, and hopefully it was helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.